Imagine a secret world, like a hidden network that's quietly moving, truly staggering amounts of money.
Trillions, really.
Yeah, trillions, shaping our economies, our futures. It's often, tucked away in offshore accounts, tax havens, benefiting just a select few.
Hmm.
And this isn't just some abstract idea, right? It touches your life, whether you realize it or not.
Absolutely.
Think about it. When a school in Nigeria lacks basic desks because $20 billion in oil revenue just vanished to the Cayman Islands,
Right.
or when a London hospital faces budget cuts because some corporation shifted its profits off to Luxembourg, the shadow economy's impact is, well, it's devastatingly real.
And the financial cost is immense. Governments globally are losing somewhere between, say, $200 to $500 billion every single year in lost taxes. That's the Tax Justice Network's 2020 estimate.
Wow, $500 billion a year.
It's a staggering sum that could be funding vital public services. And this outflow, it just fuels massive inequality, and frankly, it deeply erodes public trust in our systems.
So our mission today in this deep dive is really to pull back the curtain on this secretive system. We're going to explore how it was built.
Understand who truly benefits.
Exactly, and try to grapple with why it persists. But crucially, we also want to look at the tenacious fight to actually dismantle it. Our source for this exploration today is The Shadow Economy: Inside the Secret World of Offshore Banking, Tax Havens, and Elite Networks by Les Fletcher. Okay, let's unpack this hidden world.
Let's do it.
So to really get the origins of this shadow economy, we have to go way back, like medieval Europe.
That's exactly right. Around the 12th century, think bustling Italian city-states.
Okay.
That's where the very first seeds of, let's call it financial secrecy, were sown. Believe it or not, the Knights Templar developed a rudimentary banking system.
The Knights Templar, really?
Yeah, they allowed merchants to deposit gold in one place and withdraw it somewhere else using just a simple coded letter of credit. Sounds basic now.
But revolutionary then.
Exactly. It effectively separated wealth from its physical location, a real precursor to what we see today. And this method, it was later refined, adopted by big Italian banking families, like the Medici.
Ah, the Medici, of course.
Right, to protect their assets from political upheaval or, seizure.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Fast forward to the colonial era. The Caribbean becomes this chaotic haven.
A bit unlikely, perhaps.
Right. First, it was a hotbed for pirates, smugglers, places like Nassau, Port Royal.
And this created what we now call jurisdictional arbitrage.
Exploiting legal differences, basically.
Precisely. Exploiting the differences in laws between territories. Bermuda, for example, was an early player. There's a 1726 British inquiry that specifically noted its, quote, clandestine commerce.
Wow. Clandestine commerce.
And the American Revolution only supercharged this trend. It turned the Bahamas into this massive smuggling hub. One colonial governor actually called it the business of invisibility.
The business of invisibility, I like that.
While the Caribbean offered secrecy through, let's say, sheer chaos, Switzerland took a different path, more refined.
Right, the Swiss model.
Its unique political neutrality, combined with informal codes, which were later formalized in 1713. Geneva regulations offered a stable, protected place for wealth, shielding it from Europe's constant political instability.
Okay.
This really cemented Switzerland's role as a reliable safe haven, especially after the chaos of the 1789 French Revolution.
Then the industrial age arrives, bringing new pressures, right? Which accelerated things again.
Definitely. Rising taxes, like Britain's income tax in 1799.
And new taxes in the U.S. after the Civil War.
Exactly. That led to a kind of reemergence of the Caribbean as the go-to financial escape route. A truly pivotal moment was the Bahamas' 1869 exempted companies legislation.
Okay, what did that do?
It explicitly marketed the jurisdiction as a haven. Meanwhile, Switzerland codified its famous secrecy into law with the Swiss Banking Act of 1934.
Ah, the 34 Act. That's legendary.
It is, but it has this double-edged legacy. While it offered crucial protection for vulnerable people fleeing conflict,
it also became a powerful shield for, illicit money.
Precisely, both vulnerable and the venal. But the true birth of modern offshore banking, the system we'd recognize today, really came after World War II, with the rise of the euro markets.
The euro markets. Explain that a bit.
Okay, take the euro-dollar market in London. It allowed banks to bypass restrictive U.S. regulations, like Regulation Q, which limited interest rates on deposits just by trading dollars outside the U.S.
Ah, so outside U.S. jurisdiction. Clever.
Very clever. It created this huge, unregulated space. And this led to a massive influx of financial activity in places like the Cayman Islands. They passed a regulation law in 1960.
And suddenly, banks flooded in.
Over 100 banks set up shop there by 1970. It was a profound philosophical shift, really, tying wealth not to a nation-state, but to this global, often hidden network.
And those colonial legacies you mentioned earlier, they played a big part.
Absolutely crucial. Former British colonies like Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, BVI, Jersey, they brilliantly reinvented themselves as these microhavens.
Right.
The BVI, for instance, passed its International Business Companies Act in 1984. It allowed anonymous companies to be set up for just $1,000.
$1,000. That's it.
That's it. By 1990, over 100,000 companies were registered there. That's 10 times its population. Just staggering.
Wow.
It creates this fascinating moral quagmire, doesn't it? These same financial tools, which historically protected dissidents or refugees from oppressive regimes.
They also enabled dictators to loot entire nations.
Exactly. We saw it in Haiti in the 1800s and 1900s. Elites used offshore accounts to hide stolen wealth, which directly made poverty and instability worse.
That's a powerful point about the dual nature of these systems. So, given this intricate web that developed, who were the actual architects, the masterminds behind building it all?
Well, first you had the new alchemists, the
Yeah.
bankers. They saw this huge opportunity in the regulatory cracks after World War II. In London, they practically invented the euro-dollar market we just discussed, offering higher interest rates, operating outside oversight.
Sidestepping the rules.
Pretty much. Sidestepping Bretton Woods. Figures like Sir John Templeton relocating his funds to the Bahamas in '68 that inspired countless other bankers to see offshore not as fringe, but as strategic, lucrative hubs.
Okay, so the bankers saw the opportunity. Then who built the structures?
That would be the legal artisans, the lawyers.
Ah, the lawyers.
They meticulously crafted the legal frameworks that made it all work. This is where you see the rise of shell companies, like those BVI international business companies.
Perfected by firms like Mossack Fonseca, right, from the Panama Papers.
The very same. Minimal documentation, no public disclosure. By 1985, the BVI alone had over 10,000 of them.
Incredible.
Lawyers also innovated with trusts, legally separating who owns the asset from who benefits.
Onion structure.
Exactly. Often layered across multiple countries, making tracing ownership almost impossible. And they invented clever things like the Liechtenstein Anstalt, a kind of hybrid structure, part company, part trust.
A legal chameleon.
Pretty much. Became a favorite of elites by the 60s for its secrecy. And you had global firms like Baker McKenzie playing both sides, advising clients on these structures while lobbying governments to keep the loopholes open.
Wow. Okay, bankers, lawyers, who else?
We absolutely can't forget the silent partners, the accountants. Especially the big four, PwC, Deloitte, EY, KPMG.
Right, the big accounting firms.
They specialize in what they call tax optimization,
Mm.
which often meant designing these incredibly intricate strategies like transfer pricing to shift profits to low-tax jurisdictions, sometimes to an absurd degree.
Like the Apple case in Ireland.
That's a classic example, widely reported. By exploiting Irish tax laws, Apple funneled billions in profits, paying an effective tax rate as low as 0.0005% by 2014.
0.005%. That's almost nothing.
Practically nothing. And that case became a template for countless other multinationals looking to minimize their global tax bill.
And behind these individuals, there were the big institutions driving it.
For sure. The institutions of influence, the major banks that scaled this system up massively. HSBC's Swiss private bank, for example, managed 30,000 accounts holding $120 billion by 2007. That came out in the Lagarde list leak.
Right, I remember that.
Citibank's Nassau branch became a key hub for Eurodollar deposits, managing over $10 billion by 1980. Even smaller boutique banks, say in the Caymans, specialize in setting up trusts and shells for the ultra-wealthy.
So the Euro markets were really the engine room for this expansion.
They really underpinned it. Sigmund Warburg's firm issued the first Eurobond in 1963, listed in Luxembourg specifically for anonymity. That market grew from almost nothing to over $5 billion by 1970.
And it represents this detachment from national control.
Exactly, a detachment from sovereignty, where finance operates largely beyond the oversight of any single government.
Okay, we've talked about the architects. What about the actual tools? Let's dive into the machinery they use to make wealth disappear.
Right. At the very core, you have shell companies.
Just paper companies, basically.
Exactly. Legal entities existing only on paper, no real operations, designed purely to obscure who owns the assets. The BVI's 1984 Act made them super flexible. By 2020, there were a staggering 400,000 active shells there.
400,000?
Yep, allows wealth to be totally hidden. Like, imagine a fictional John Kessler shielding $50 million in a Swiss account via a BVI company. Or a real Middle Eastern businessman reportedly owning 200 BVI shells for his $2 billion empire.
And the Panama Papers really blew the lid off that.
Vividly showed how widespread their use is.
Okay, so shells are one tool. What else?
Then you have trusts. These offer this incredibly powerful legal shield. They separate legal ownership from beneficial ownership.
So who owns it isn't necessarily who gets the money.
Precisely. The Cayman Islands Trusts Law of 1967 created exempt trusts, no taxes, no public disclosure, could even last forever. They're used not just to hide wealth, but to fund lifestyles while keeping assets off the books, like that $500 million trust for a Saudi prince revealed by a Guernsey leak.
And they help with taxes too, right?
Deferral, significant tax deferral, especially in places like the U.S. where certain trusts can postpone tax payments almost indefinitely.
Okay, shells, trusts. What's the third piece?
Special purpose entities, or SPEs.
SPEs, right?
These are subsidiaries created by corporations for very specific reasons, often to isolate financial risk, or more commonly, to minimize taxes.
Like in the Enron scandal.
Famously.
The
Enron used over 3,000 SPEs to hide massive amounts of debt. Multinationals like Google perfected this with strategies like the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich.
It sounds complicated.
It is. It allowed them to move $12 billion to Bermuda by 2014, resulting in an effective tax rate of just 2.4%. It's financial sleight of hand, basically.
The sheer scale of all this hidden wealth. It's hard to get your head around.
Truly dizzying. Economists estimate somewhere between $7 to $12 trillion held offshore by 2010.
7 to 12 trillion.
Gabriel Zucman put it at $7.6 trillion. The Tax Justice Network estimated even higher, $11.5 trillion. And it's not evenly spread. Europe about 40%, Asia 30%, Caribbean 20%.
And the cost to governments, that $200 billion annual loss you mentioned earlier.
Or more, up to $500 billion. And think about Africa. They lose an estimated 30% of their potential tax revenue this way.
Just devastating. And multinational corporations are big players here.
Huge players, the masters of the loophole. They mostly use profit shifting via transfer pricing that accounts for maybe 80% of shifted profits, costing governments $500 billion a year.
How does that work again? Transfer pricing.
Basically, divisions of the same company in different countries charge each other inflated prices for goods or services to move profits to the low-tax country. Companies like Chevron have also used debt shifting.
Like lending money to yourself at high interest.
Exactly. Chevron faced a $340 million tax bill in Australia for lending to a Delaware SBE at inflated rates, sending profits out as interest payments. Treaty shopping is another tactic, using countries like the Netherlands or Luxembourg to route funds.
And the jurisdictions themselves are actively helping this. They're enablers.
Absolutely. These places actively design laws to attract this hidden wealth. The Caymans hold $1.5 trillion in assets. Delaware, right in the U.S.
Yeah, Delaware's famous for company registrations.
1.5 million companies, 60% of the Fortune 500, largely due to its secrecy laws. Singapore manages $1 trillion offshore. The Bahamas created things like segregated accounts companies. Malta even sells citizenship.
Buying your way into a tax haven.
Pretty much.
So we've seen how it's built, the tools, but who is wielding this power? Who are the ultimate beneficiaries?
Well, you're looking at the elite nexus. Politicians, oligarchs, billionaires, often interconnected.
And their reasons vary.
Complex motivations.
Yeah.
A fictional Russian oligarch, say Viktor Morozov, might shield $2 billion in Cyprus shells from Kremlin reprisals.
Okay, self-preservation maybe.
Or a fictional Caribbean minister holds $50 million in an Assad trust, supposedly consulting fees tied to government contracts.
Right, corruption.
And a U.S. hedge fund manager moves $1 billion to the Caymans just to defer taxes indefinitely, letting the wealth grow untaxed. These examples reflect reality. An estimated 10% of global billionaires' wealth, maybe $1 trillion, is offshore.
And the Pandora Papers really threw a spotlight on this, didn't they?
An unprecedented, frankly shocking window. 11.9 million documents exposing 35 heads of state, 330 politicians, countless billionaires.
Who are some of the big names?
Incredible names. Jordan's King Abdullah II, linked to 36 BVI shells holding $100 million in properties in the UK and US.
Wow.
Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, shown using a Monaco shell to buy a $22 million chateau in France while publicly denying offshore dealings.
That hypocrisy.
And maybe most controversially, Russian President Vladimir Putin's inner circle heavily implicated. Close associates identified as beneficiaries of vast offshore wealth. It showed no one was off limits.
That's powerful. And this all comes with a huge economic toll, right? We keep mentioning the lost taxes.
Absolutely. That $500 billion annual loss isn't just a number. It's money that could build schools, hospitals, roads, fight climate change. Apple alone avoided maybe $7 billion in U.S. taxes annually for years.
And it fuels inequality.
Directly. The top 0.01% hold 50% of offshore assets. The ultra-rich pay proportionally less tax, widening the wealth gap. In the U.S., top 1% wealth has soared. Europe's Gini coefficient measuring inequality has rapidly increased, partly due to this.
And this must have social fallout, too, eroding trust.
It absolutely does. A 2016 survey found 64% of Americans think the tax system favors the wealthy. 70% of Europeans see tax evasion as a major threat.
People aren't stupid. They see it.
And that palpable anger often sparks political unrest, like the UK's Uncut movement or the protests in Iceland that brought down the PM after the Panama Papers. In Brazil, the massive Lava Jato scandal using offshore channels fueled populism.
The case studies from developing nations really drive home the most devastating impacts, don't they? The capital flight.
They show the true human cost. Developing countries lose an estimated $1.6 trillion annually through illicit financial flows.
$1.6 trillion a year.
Take Nigeria. $150 billion in oil revenue vanished between 2000 and 2010 to BVI and Panama accounts, including $500 million for one oil minister. That directly crippled Nigeria's ability to provide basic services.
Unbelievable.
Venezuela's Chavez regime siphoned off maybe $300 billion. 14 elites held $50 billion offshore, worsening their humanitarian crisis. Indonesia, under Suharto, $15 billion siphoned by his family and cronies, money desperately needed for development.
So in essence, the shadow economy isn't just hiding wealth, it's actively destabilizing societies, especially the most vulnerable ones.
Profoundly destabilizing.
It makes you wonder, is this system just about hiding money, or is it actively dangerous? What's alarming is how deliberate the design seems, creating instability almost as a feature.
You're right. We need to talk about shadow banking.
Yeah.
Financial activities happening almost entirely outside traditional bank regulation. By 2010, this system controlled an astonishing $60 trillion in assets, with maybe 40% often run through offshore jurisdictions like the Caymans and Luxembourg.
60 trillion, that's enormous.
Think of a fictional hedge fund, Apex Capital. It could borrow billions offshore, totally invisible to regulators, amplifying market volatility with very little oversight.
And the ties to offshore finance are fundamental here.
Absolutely. Shell companies, trusts, SBEs, they're the building blocks of shadow banking. The Eurodollar market, $7 trillion by 2007, is a prime example.
Oh, so.
A bank, let's call it Global Trust, could use Eurodollar loans to fund a $2 billion derivatives portfolio via a Bahamas SPE, all away from regulators. Plus, a staggering 60% of global hedge funds are domiciled in the Caymans or BVI.
And we saw the danger with long-term capital management back in '98.
Exactly. Their $1.4 trillion in derivatives nearly crashed global markets precisely because offshore secrecy hid their massive exposure.
So the complexity itself is a tool.
Complexity is truly a weapon in this system. Layered offshore structures for things like CDOs, collateralized debt obligations.
Like Citibank's Trident 2006 one.
That kind of thing. Made it almost impossible to see the underlying risk. Derivatives with a notional value of $600 trillion by 2010 routinely obscure risk further.
And shield tax avoidance, too.
Definitely. Google Lux used a structure with 15 entities to hold $20 billion untaxed. Imagine a regulator trying to audit that, facing 10,000 pages of inscrutable documents. Oversight becomes impossible.
So this complexity leads to opacity, the shield of sabotage.
Exactly. Secret registries, nominee directors, bearer shares where ownership just follows the physical paper certificate. They protect shadow banks from real accountability.
Like Bear Stearns Cayman funds in 2007.
Their subprime CDOs, the $1.6 billion bailout, all shrouded in Cayman secrecy. Money laundering thrives on this. A fictional cartel using a BVI shell to move $500 million. Even dark pool trading, like Barclays LX, allows anonymous trading, obscuring potential manipulation.
And all this creates massive risks of instability.
Profound risks. Unregulated shadow banking introduces systemic vulnerabilities. The 2008 crisis, costing $10 trillion globally. Driven largely by Lehman's 7,000 Cayman SPEs, hiding $50 billion in toxic assets. Shadow banking typically has incredible leverage, maybe 30 to 1, and huge liquidity mismatches, funding long-term assets with short-term money. Leads to runs, like on money market funds in 2008.
And we've seen this sabotage in action more recently, too.
Absolutely. Wirecard, the German fintech, collapsed in 2020. A $2 billion fraud tied directly to offshore shells and hidden flows.
And Greensill Capital.
Failed in 2021. Owing $5 billion. It's opaque, Luxembourg SPEs, masked risks, destabilizing communities, even governments.
It seems so entrenched. Is this fortress of secrecy truly impregnable, or are cracks starting to show? Is there hope?
Fortunately, yes, there are significant cracks appearing. There's been a very determined global push through regulatory efforts.
Like FATIA in the U.S.
Exactly. The 2010 U.S. law requires foreign banks to report U.S. clients. Covered over $7 trillion in assets, recovered $14 billion so far. Exposed people like the fictional David Kessler paying a $10 million penalty.
But it has limits. Only U.S. taxpayers.
Right, and havens adapt. Then came CRS, the 2014 OECD standard. Basically, FTC goes global. 110 countries, exchanging data, covering $10 trillion, recovered $120 billion.
So that's making a difference.
It is. Exposed accounts like the fictional Elena Voss's $200 million Jersey Trust. But big gaps remain. The U.S. itself hasn't fully adopted CRS.
Right, and corporate tax avoidance.
That's BEPS, the 2013 OECD project.
Huh.
Targets that $500 billion annual loss. 137 countries adopted it, recovered $100 billion. Forced companies like the fictional Global Mart to disclose structures. But enforcement is still a struggle. Havens adapt.
But the real game changer, you could argue, has been the power of leaks, driven by the ICIJ.
Absolutely. They've been huge disruptors. The offshore leaks in 2013, 260 gigabytes, 120,000 shells exposed, $1 billion recovered.
Then the Panama Papers.
2016, 11.5 million Mossack Fonseca files, 200,000 entities, $1.2 billion recovered, Icelandic PM resigned.
Followed by the Paradise Papers.
2017, 13.4 million files, focused on corporate evasion. Apple's $252 billion Jersey Trust came out, $500 million recovered.
And the biggest leak, the Pandora Papers.
2021, 11.9 million documents. 35 heads of state, 130 billionaires implicated, $300 million recovered so far. These weren't just data dumps. They were meticulous investigations forcing accountability.
Incredible work by journalists. But the system fights back.
Oh, absolutely. The shadow economy fights back with formidable resistance. You see jurisdictional defiance. The BVI rejects public registries. Cayman's delays CRS. Luxembourg locks EU blacklists. Delaware resists global standards.
And the banks and law firms push back too.
Significant banking and legal pushback. HSBC reportedly funded anti-CRS campaigns. Credit Suisse shifted clients to Singapore. Law firms like Appleby are creating crypto trusts. Baker McKenzie lobbies hard.
And the elite influence. Donations.
Definitely. The wealthy donate heavily to political campaigns, often to protect these havens and the loopholes that benefit them directly.
This raises such an important question. What's the personal cost? Confronting these powerful networks isn't easy.
The human toll is profound, especially for whistleblowers. Hervé Falciani, the UBS leaker, exposed $20 billion, fled to France, convicted in absentia in Switzerland. Bradley Birkenfeld, another UBS whistleblower, recovered $12 billion for the U.S., got a $104 million reward, but served 31 months in prison.
Prison, even after helping recover billions.
Yeah. And the anonymous John Doe behind the Panama Papers took immense personal risks we still don't fully grasp. They face legal persecution, financial ruin, isolation, even physical danger.
And it's not just whistleblowers. Journalists face huge risks, too.
Severe risks. especially those of the ICIJ, like Bastian Obermeyer and Frederick Obermeyer, who broke the Panama Papers. They battle cyber attacks, legal threats, surveillance, even violence. It's a sobering statistic. 50% of journalists covering financial corruption face violence. 10% have been killed since 2010, mostly in Africa and Latin America. It's a dangerous beat.
That's chilling. And the broader societal costs.
Widespread, often unseen. Fractured trust in institutions. Deep political polarization, like we saw in Iceland and Brazil. Economic disruption, even in the havens themselves, if the system changes too quickly. And that profound moral dilemma.
The legitimate uses versus the kleptocrats.
Exactly. A Syrian refugee family's trust versus someone like Teodoro Obiang looting a nation. The mechanisms look the same, making reform incredibly difficult.
So, after all this, exploring the system, the players, the impact, what does it mean for the future? How do we even begin to build a fairer financial system?
Well, reformers have put forward concrete proposals for reform. One big idea is global wealth registries.
Making ownership public everywhere.
That's the goal. Economist Gabriel Zucman proposes one that could expose $10 trillion offshore, recover maybe $300 billion annually.
Yeah.
The EU's 2018 beneficial ownership registry serves as a working model. It's already exposed $500 billion.
Okay, what else?
Enhanced regulatory cooperation. Expanding CRS to non-participating havens. And the landmark global minimum corporate tax, 15%, endorsed by the G20, aims to recover $150 billion a year by curbing profit shifting.
That's potentially huge.
Plus, strengthening the FATF's anti-money laundering frameworks constantly.
But the challenges are massive, right?
Huge challenges. Fierce political resistance from elites. Lobbying, donations, politicians blocking reforms like some U.S. senators stopping a global registry.
And the havens themselves depend on this money.
Huge economic dependence. BVI earns $200 million in fees. Delaware, $1 billion. They resist changes that could wreck their economies.
And the technical side, keeping up.
Significant technical barriers, the sheer complexity of structures, lack of enforcement resources in developing nations, and new tech like crypto trusts and blockchain shells often outpacing regulators.
Still, there's a vision.
Despite the hurdles, the vision is clear. A fairer financial system, built on universal transparency, equitable taxation, global accountability.
Meaning real consequences.
Like criminal sanctions on complicit banks, global blacklists for non-compliant jurisdictions. Ensuring wealth serves the many, not just the shadows.
The path forward is, yeah, it seems fragile, but it is real. It needs sustained will from governments, citizens, and those brave whistleblowers.
Absolutely.
So we've journeyed deep into this shadow economy, uncovered its truly massive scale, its profound impact. From trillions in lost taxes, the widening inequality gap, to that deep erosion of public trust, the toll is immense. We talked about Amina in Lagos, whose kids lack desks because oil money vanished, how underfunded public services, things we all experience, are often a direct consequence of this wealth hiding in plain sight.
And the shadow economy's resilience is formidable. It's a testament to centuries of, well, ingenious design. Yet we've also seen those growing cracks, real signs of hope.
Right, the tangible impacts.
The $250 billion recovered by FSTA and CRS, $3 billion directly from leaks like the Pandora Papers, global efforts like the 15% minimum tax making a difference. These aren't just theoretical wins, they're real money back in public hands.
And the key thing is, the shadow economy's secrecy isn't inevitable. It's not a force of nature, it's a choice, right? Actively maintained by power, by inertia, just things staying the way they are.
Exactly.
But those cracks can widen. History shows us that even the most entrenched systems can change. Think about the abolition of slavery, the fall of huge monopolies, the hard-won fight for suffrage, all overcame deeply entrenched power. The shadow economy is no different.
A powerful perspective. So, as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, what stands out to you? How does this system, built on ingenuity and secrecy, impact the world around you? And maybe think about what your role could be, even a small one, in pushing for that future where wealth truly serves the many, not just the shadows.
Because challenging secrecy really is a fight for justice, and as we've seen, it's a fight often paid in courage and sacrifice.